Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the cold, unforgiving world of medieval society, where life was dictated by one thing: your birthright. You're a peasant, trudging through knee-deep muck in your tattered boots, hoping for a meal by nightfall. Maybe you've heard the stories, the castles, the knights, the grand feasts, but they don't apply to you. Not today. Not in this world, no. Your world is one of hard labor, fleeting moments of rest, and an unspoken rule. Survive another day, and maybe, just maybe, things will stay the same. The only thing you can count on is the weight of the land beneath your feet, and the constant reminder that it's not yours. You don't own it. You're just borrowing it. At least until your lord demands it back. But enough about you, for now. It's a bit of a gloomy picture, isn't it? Well, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and post your location and local time. Let's share this moment together, across time and space. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine you're living in a world where survival depends on your social rank. No, not your skill, your ingenuity, or even your ability to make it through the next week. It all comes down to the circumstances of your birth. No amount of hard work can change the fact that you're born a peasant. And the higher-ups, they don't care. They never will. Now picture yourself walking through a village, past the market square where merchants, mostly higher up the food chain than you, haggling over goods. Their voices are louder, their demeanor more assured. But you're just trying to stay out of sight. Head down, because being noticed could mean being dragged into a job you don't want. Or worse, being blamed for something you didn't do. It wasn't just about survival. It was about knowing your place. Always knowing it. Always remembering that the class structure was solid. Like a fortress, built brick by brick and impossible to scale. Now, let's take a step up. Above you in this rigid, unyielding hierarchy are the nobles. They live in their castles, towering over the land and over you. You've heard stories about their feasts, about the lavish halls with tapestries as rich as the lands they own. But for all their wealth, what you can't quite understand is how little they seem to care about the world that exists outside their gates. The land they control is vast, extending from one end of the valley to the other. And it's not just theirs by right, it's theirs by force. These lords and ladies, the ones with the titles, are the ones who make the laws, who decide who gets to eat, who gets to work, and, importantly, who gets to live. You don't see them often. In fact, you may never have laid eyes on your lord and lady. They are distant figures, like gods in their marble halls. Their words are passed down through scribes, their orders carried out by knights and serfs. But if you were ever to catch a glimpse of them, let's say, in the town square during a rare visit, you might see a finely dressed lady, adorned in rich fabrics of deep teal and russet, her hair braided and twined with gold thread. Her presence commands attention, even if she isn't saying anything. There's power in silence, and it radiates off her, making you feel smaller, invisible in a way that's unsettling. Behind her, the Lord stands tall in his dark cloak, embroidered with symbols of his lineage, each stitch a reminder of his superiority over you and the land. Historians still argue whether this rigid class structure was a natural evolution of human societies or a construct used by the elite to preserve their power. Some claim that the feudal system was a necessary means to maintain order in a chaotic, post-Roman world. Others suggest that the aristocracy, in its greed, used these systems to lock people like you, people born with no titles, into an unbreakable cycle of labor. Either way, what's clear is that the lord's and lady's life wasn't just one of wealth, but of constant control. And your existence, as a peasant, depended entirely on the whims of those who controlled it. The rich were rich because they could take whatever they wanted from those below them. And there you were, just trying to survive another season, another harvest, another year. Now, let's talk about the peasants. You know the drill. You've seen them, lived with them, worked beside them. But how much do you really understand about the struggle they face every day? Imagine a life where your future is completely out of your hands. Your family's survival depends on the harvest, no matter the weather, no matter the seasons. You don't own the land you work on. You don't even own the tools you use. You borrow them. They're your lords, and everything you produce belongs to them. The crops, the wool, the cattle, all of it. You work tirelessly, day after day, but you can't escape the fact that no matter how hard you try, you'll always be trapped in this cycle of labor. The rent you pay is in the form of labor or a portion of your harvest. And if you fail to meet the demands of your lord, there are consequences, not the gentle kind either. Fail to pay your dues, and your land could be taken away, or worse. You might end up in the stocks in front of the entire village as a public warning to others. But you're not just a worker, you're a serf. Yes, technically you're not a slave. You can't be bought or sold like one, but you might as well be. Serfs were tied to the land, bound by an unbreakable chain of obligations to the lord they served. Sure, you could technically leave, but doing so would leave you with nothing. No land, no crops, no family. You'd be an outcast, living as an itinerant laborer with no place to call home. Your whole existence, your whole life, is wrapped around the land and your lord's will. You're born into it, live it, and die in it. Historians still debate how harsh this system truly was. Some argue that serfs had more freedom than we often assume. They had rights, land to call their own, and protections under the law. Others suggest that the serfdom system was little more than legalized slavery, forcing peasants into lifelong servitude with few opportunities for advancement. But in your world, it doesn't matter. You don't get to choose. Your life is shaped by the whims of those higher up on the social ladder. And the only thing you can do is try to survive each year, hoping for a good harvest, praying that the Lord will be merciful if times get hard. But at least you've got your family. Right? The little moments of joy that make the grind bearable, a shared meal, a brief respite during the harvest season. For now, those fleeting moments are all you have to hold on to. In the end, you know that's all that matters. Surviving another day, another year, and yet, even the smallest flicker of hope can be extinguished if the wrong man comes to collect. As the sun begins to rise over the distant horizon, you watch the first light break over the village. The glow spreads slowly, casting long shadows across the fields, where the night's frost is still hanging on the grass. There's something about the early morning, something that gives you just a moment of quiet peace before the world starts to demand more from you. But that peace is short-lived. soon enough. The sounds of the village start to return. Children's voices calling, the bleating of sheep, the low murmur of workers starting their day. You feel it in your bones, the urgency of the day ahead. It's a constant race against time. The work never ends. In the midst of all this, there's one thing that often gets overlooked: the role of the guilds and the middle class. There's a strange, fragile hope in the rise of towns and guilds. For some, these are the very things that might offer an escape from the rigid social structure you're stuck in. The new artisan class, the merchants and craftsmen, they have more freedom. They can make their own decisions, earn their own wages, and live outside the influence of lords who hold power over your every move. These towns are growing, slowly but surely, and with them, the possibility of climbing higher in the social ladder, if you're lucky. Yet, for all the promise of upward mobility, there's always a ceiling. The towns may offer a glimmer of hope, but the class distinctions still prevail. A successful merchant or artisan may be wealthier than some knights, but they will always be second to the nobility in terms of power and status, even in a bustling market, where everyone seems to be haggling and trading goods. There's a visible divide. The lords still look down from their castles, their wealth on full display, while you scrape by day after day, hoping that one day you'll see a change. Historians still argue over the true power of these emerging towns and guilds. Some claim that they represented a major shift in medieval society, where the power of merchants and craftsmen could rival that of the traditional aristocracy. Others suggest that, despite the wealth they generated, towns were always subordinate to the power and structure of feudalism. What's undeniable is that the hope for upward mobility never quite escaped the class system, and those who believed in the promise of the guilds had to constantly fight against the entrenched hierarchy. For you, though, it's not a matter of climbing higher. It's about surviving another year, hoping that the crops don't fail, praying for the mercy of the Lord who owns the land. And yet, you know the cold truth. Survival itself is a victory. The sun is now fully up, casting a warmer glow across the village. But it doesn't change the fact that your work has just begun. The sense of isolation that has crept into your bones over the years is unshakable, and the world around you continues to turn as if your existence is simply a cog in a much larger machine. You're a peasant. After all, your role is essential, but invisible. No one thinks about you unless something goes wrong. If the harvest fails, it's your fault. If the taxes aren't met, it's your responsibility. But if things go right, no one remembers you. The nobility goes about their business. The merchants make their profits. And you just keep working the fields, tending to animals, and surviving. But there is an underlying tension in the air that you can't quite ignore. It's not just the work. It's the constant awareness that the nobility, the lords, and the clergy are in control. And their control is absolute. Everything you do is for them. The wool you spin, the crops you harvest, the animals you raise, all of it goes to the Lord who owns the land. You're a servant, though you're not called that. In the eyes of the Lord, you're a tenant, a worker, but not a person in the truest sense of the word. Your life exists to serve, and you have little say in what happens next. The clergy too, hold incredible power over you. The church isn't just a place of worship. It's an institution that is deeply embedded in every aspect of medieval life. From the moment you're born, the church holds sway over your life. It tells you what's right and wrong, dictates your morality, and offers the promise of salvation in exchange for your obedience. But don't mistake it for kindness. While the church preaches compassion, it also reinforces the class system, making sure that everyone knows their place. Priests, bishops, and cardinals live in comfort while you labor away, praying for the day when your soul might be saved. But never your body. The church doesn't feed you. It doesn't give you a roof over your head, and it certainly doesn't offer a path out of your servitude. Historians still argue whether the church played a more significant role in supporting or suppressing social change. Some claim that the clergy used its position to help peasants, offering charity and even advocating for more humane treatment. Others argue that the church, in its vast wealth and power, reinforced the rigid class structure, keeping peasants in their place. Either way, what's clear is that the church's influence, alongside the nobilities, made escape from your station nearly impossible. The idea of salvation was a tool used to control you, to ensure your obedience, and to remind you that in the grand scheme of things, your life didn't matter. Only your service did. But you still hold on to those brief moments when the work stops, and you sit with your family around the fire. Those fleeting instances of peace remind you that, despite everything, you are still human. You are still allowed to live, to love, to have something that's just for you, even if it's only for a few moments. As you carry on with the endless work, you can't help but wonder if there's something more to life than this. You've heard whispers of rebellion in the taverns, rumors of uprisings in distant villages. Some talk of the rising merchant class, others speak of peasants organizing. But for now, all you can do is keep your head down and focus on getting through the day. The fear of punishment, the constant reminder that the Lord's eyes are everywhere, keeps you in line. What would happen if you just stopped? What if you refused to work one day? Would the world stop turning, or would the weight of the Lord's punishment be too much to bear? You've heard stories of peasant revolts, of desperate men and women who rise up against the lords, only to be crushed by the might of the knights and the nobles. It seems so hopeless. Even if you had the courage, what could you possibly do? A handful of peasants with pitchforks against a castle full of armed knights. It's a dream, a fantasy, and deep down, you know that. But still, the idea of it lingers in the back of your mind. Could it be different? Could life, even for a peasant, be more than servitude, more than endless work for a pittance? Historians still debate how often these revolts occurred and how effective they were. Some claim that they were rare, fleeting moments of resistance that never gained enough momentum to truly change anything. Others suggest that the fear of revolt was so pervasive that it influenced how peasants were treated. Lords were wary of their power being challenged, and that fear shaped their actions. Either way, the result was the same. Most peasants were trapped in the cycle, unable to break free. Yet, despite the odds, there were moments of defiance. Peasants would find ways to resist, even if it was something as small as refusing to work on a certain day or secretly keeping a portion of the harvest for themselves. These acts of rebellion were small, often unnoticed by the lords, but they were a way to assert control, even if only for a moment. For some, that small rebellion was enough to feel human again, to feel like they had a sliver of power in a world where it seemed to be so far out of reach. But, Of course, rebellion doesn't come without consequences. When a lord's authority is challenged, there's always the possibility of retaliation. The punishments for these small acts of defiance can be harsh: whipping, imprisonment, even execution. The fear of such consequences keeps most people in line. The risks are too high, and the system is designed to prevent any real change. Still, life goes on. You return to your work. The fields need tending, the animals need feeding, and the cycle continues. The hope for change, for revolution, remains a distant dream, a quiet wish that lives only in the back of your mind. And maybe that's enough for now, because it's better to have a flicker of hope, even if it's small and fragile, than to give up completely. As you move through your daily routine, there's one thing that you can't escape, no matter how much you might try to ignore it: the immense power of the church. It's not just a place to pray. It's an institution that controls every part of your life. From the moment you're born, you are baptized and bound to the church, and throughout your life, its influence will shape you. The clergy are not just religious leaders. They are the ones who own the land, who collect the tithes, and who are involved in the lawmaking that controls every facet of medieval society. You could be the most loyal peasant, the hardest worker. But in the end, if you don't follow the rules of the church, you risk being cast out, or worse, punished in ways too grim to imagine. You've seen the power of the church firsthand. On Sundays, the church bells ring through the village, signaling the beginning of Mass. You've heard the sermons from the priest, who tells you to be humble, to serve your Lord, to accept your station in life with patience and grace. But it's hard to believe when you see the wealth the church has accumulated. The bishops and priests live in comfort while you struggle to make it through the season. It's as if they are part of a different world, one where comfort and privilege are guaranteed, while you're left scraping for whatever little you can get. The opulence of the clergy's lifestyle is hard to reconcile with the vows of poverty they preach, and the disparity between your life and theirs gnaws at you. Historians still debate the role the church played in maintaining the feudal system. Some argue that the church was a stabilizing force, helping to provide structure in a chaotic, post-Roman world. Others believe that it was deeply complicit in perpetuating the class system, using its moral authority to keep peasants in check. What is clear, however, is that the church was a tool of the ruling class, aligning itself with those in power to ensure its own survival. The concept of divine right, that kings ruled because they were chosen by God, was a powerful idea that kept the nobility in control. And the church was right there to reinforce that belief. You've heard whispers of corruption within the church, stories of priests who have broken their vows, of bishops who've taken advantage of the peasants, and of the church's growing wealth and influence. But what can you do, even if you tried to speak out? You know it would be your word against the power of an entire institution. So, you keep your head down, and you pray. You pray for a better future. But deep down, you know it's unlikely. The church tells you to be patient, that your reward will come in the afterlife. But what about now? What about the present, the life you live every day? The promises of heaven don't feed your children, and they don't fix your roof when it leaks. The church has power, and you, like so many others, are at its mercy. But even though you know there's little you can do to change the system, the small flicker of hope still burns within you. Maybe, just maybe, things can change. Maybe, in some far-off future, the classes will shift, and you won't have to live in this never-ending cycle of labor and servitude. But until that day, you live as you have, working, surviving, and praying. In the midst of all this hardship, there is still a faint glimmer of hope for those who can find it. The middle class. Sure, it's a small fraction of society, but for those merchants, artisans, and professionals who fall into it, the opportunities can be significant. These are the people who, with a bit of skill, a good eye for trade, or a solid apprenticeship, can rise above the peasantry and gain a level of wealth and freedom that is unimaginable for most. They're the ones running the shops, managing the markets, or even handling the finances of the church and the nobility. The towns, those humble collections of houses and workshops, are starting to become the new centers of commerce, slowly pushing the feudal system aside, at least in small pockets of the world. In a way, these towns are like little oases in a desert, offering those who live in them the chance to break free from the cycle of land and lord. You've heard of merchants who've become so wealthy that they can buy land from the lord, renting it out to peasants who work for them instead of the lord. These new landowners, though not as powerful as the nobility, are starting to command a level of respect, and they're showing others that there's a way out of the cycle of servitude, even if it's a hard and uncertain path. The merchant class is beginning to carve out a place for itself, becoming a link between the nobility and the peasants, and often enjoying a better quality of life than those who are stuck in the old ways of feudalism. But even within the rising middle class, there are limitations. No matter how successful a merchant may become, they will always be under the watchful eye of the lords. Merchants and artisans may enjoy some privileges, but they're still bound by the social hierarchy. You could have wealth, you could own property, but you'd still never have the status of the nobility. And that, in the end, is what really separates the classes. Even if you find a way to rise, the boundaries that define your place in society are unyielding. Historians still debate the role of the middle class in medieval society. Some argue that the rise of the merchant class signaled the beginning of the end of feudalism. As towns and trade began to challenge the power of the nobility, others suggest that the middle class was simply another cog in the feudal machine, helping to maintain the status quo while benefiting from a new, urbanized economy. What is undeniable, though, is that this class brought with it a new sense of possibility, one that offered more hope than the rural, agrarian life could provide. And for some, that hope, no matter how small, was enough to keep going. For you, though, the middle class feels like a distant dream. It's a life that might never be yours, no matter how hard you work. You're stuck in the dirt and mud, toiling away for someone else's gain. But there's a part of you that still believes, just a little, that things could change. That maybe, just maybe, you could escape your station, even if only for a brief moment. As the seasons change and life continues, you begin to notice that there is something distinctly different about the knights and lords who visit the village. They're not just men in armor. They're symbols of power. Their very presence a reminder of the sharp divide between you and them. You've seen knights riding through the town, their armor glinting in the sunlight. The horses, they ride tall and proud. Their spurs dig into the sides of their steeds as they march past, and the sound of their hooves echoes like thunder across the cobblestone roads. These men, these knights, are revered, feared, and respected by everyone, regardless of class. They are the enforcers of the Lord's will, and their loyalty is unwavering. For a knight, duty to his lord is paramount. They live a life of discipline, constantly training to fight, to protect their lands, and to uphold the honor of their families. You can't help but wonder what it must be like to wear that armor, to walk into a room and have everyone step aside, to know that your every move is a declaration of your status. But there's a price to that life, a heavy one. As a knight, your purpose is defined by one thing: battle. A knight must be ready to fight at all times, whether for his lord, his land, or his honor. For you, it might seem like a life of glory, but for the knights, it's a life lived in constant preparation, in constant vigilance. They are always on alert, always one step away from a battle that could end it all. The life of a knight is filled with danger, death in battle, betrayal, and even the possibility of losing their land or their title. The constant fear of being called to war, the possibility of dying for a cause they may not fully understand, is a weight that presses down on them. Historians still debate the true nature of a knight's life. Some view knights as noble heroes, defenders of the weak and enforcers of justice. Others argue that knights were simply pawns in a power struggle between noble families, fighting wars not for ideals, but for personal gain. Either way, what's clear is that the life of a knight is far from easy. Yes, they may have the luxury of land and titles, but their duty to their lord is absolute. They live by a code, one that dictates their actions, their loyalty, and their role in the world. You might wonder if there's any chance for someone like you to rise to that level, to wear armor, to command respect, to live a life that's different from this endless cycle of labor. But deep down, you know it's not meant to be. Knights are born into their roles, raised in wealth and privilege, trained for battle from a young age. Your life, on the other hand, is one of survival, where the most you can hope for is a day free from the heavy load of work. And yet, in those fleeting moments when you hear the clatter of armor and see the knights ride past, you can't help but feel the weight of the divide between your world and theirs. You are a shadow in the midst of their light. But even in their gilded lives, knights are not immune to the brutal class distinctions that bind everyone in this society. They may be the Lord's right hands, but they too live in fear of betrayal, of being replaced, of losing everything they've worked for. The hierarchy, the structure of feudalism, remains solid, and no one is truly free. Even the highest knights know that their position is only as strong as the lord they serve. As you reflect on the knights and their lives, you can't help but think about the role of women in medieval society, how they so, too, are defined by the rigid class system. For women, especially those of noble birth, there is a semblance of power. But even that power is confined by the strict boundaries set by their birth and marriage. The ladies of the court are often seen as symbols of beauty, grace, and political alliance, their marriages arranged by their fathers or brothers to solidify power, form alliances, or maintain family wealth. These women are married off young, and their lives are mapped out for them long before they reach adulthood. Despite the wealth and grandeur that may come with their position, their purpose remains one thing: to bear heirs, to ensure the continuity of their family's name, and to uphold the social order. But it's not just the noble women who live under these constraints. Even women of the lower classes are caught in a web of restrictions, shaped by the roles expected of them. You see, women, no matter their class, are expected to work, marry, and maintain a household. In some ways, women in the lower classes are even more bound by duty than their wealthier counterparts. While noble women might be confined to the safety of the manor, their days filled with embroidery and courtly duties, the women of your world are the backbone of the family. They help in the fields, tend to the animals, cook the meals, and ensure that the house runs smoothly. It's a tireless existence, one that leaves little room for rest, let alone ambition. Historians still debate how much autonomy women really had in medieval society. Some suggest that women in rural areas had a degree of independence, managing households, taking care of the land when husbands were away, and even running small businesses. Others argue that women's roles were strictly limited by both cultural and religious norms, with the church placing strict boundaries on what a woman could or could not do. While it's true that the church's teachings shaped women's lives, it's also true that many women found ways to resist, to carve out small moments of autonomy in a world that sought to silence them. However, whether they were born into the nobility or the peasantry, women's lives were largely defined by the men around them, their fathers, their husbands, or the lords who controlled their families. For you, as a peasant, it's hard to imagine a life where your fate is so easily decided by someone else. It must have been strange for women of the higher classes, knowing their lives were chosen for them, that their marriages were arranged for political reasons and not for love. But for a woman of the lower classes, love and choice are luxuries too far out of reach. Your world is one of practicality, survival. You marry to ensure that your family has enough hands to work the land, to continue the cycle of labor that has been passed down from one generation to the next. The idea of choosing a partner based on love is something foreign, something romanticized by those who have the luxury of time and choice. For you, it's simply another part of the grind, another part of keeping your head down and getting through the days. And yet, you still see the glimpses of tenderness between couples, those fleeting moments when a man and woman share a look, a touch, or a quiet word of reassurance amidst the chaos of their daily lives. Even in this world of rigid class divisions, there are small rebellions of the heart, small acts of love and connection that can't be fully controlled, no matter how much the system tries to. The world of the medieval peasant may feel hopeless at times, but it's not without moments of rebellion. Though these acts of resistance are often small and fleeting. You've heard of revolts, those rare but intense moments when peasants, pushed to their breaking point, rise up against their lords. It's a dangerous game. Though, rebellion isn't for the faint of heart. It requires more than just a desire for change. It requires the courage to stand against everything that's kept you in your place for your entire life. In a world where even a misstep can cost you everything, the act of defiance takes on an extraordinary weight. But when your survival is on the line, when the daily struggle to feed your family becomes unbearable, sometimes the only option left is to fight back. You've heard the stories of uprisings, like the Peasants' Revolt in England, where thousands of peasants marched to London to demand justice. The revolt was sparked by rising taxes and the brutal conditions forced upon the peasantry. And though it was crushed in the end, it was a brief moment when the powerless had a chance to challenge the system. For a fleeting moment, it felt like the peasants had the power to reshape their world. But it didn't last. As history shows, these uprisings were often short-lived, brutally suppressed, and their leaders executed. The lords and the nobility did not hesitate to quash any hint of rebellion, reinforcing the idea that the peasant's place in the social hierarchy was unchangeable. Historians still debate whether these revolts had any lasting impact on the medieval class structure. Some argue that these revolts were simply desperate outbursts, never able to fundamentally change the system. Others believe that these uprisings were signs of the beginning of a shift in the medieval world, where the peasantry would eventually demand and win greater rights. In any case, what's clear is that, for most peasants, the dream of revolution was just that, a dream. You rise, you fight. But in the end, the system remains largely the same, with the same lords in control, the same class distinctions separating you from any hope of upward mobility. For you, the fear of failure is always present. The consequences of rebellion are known to you, and they are terrifying. Failure doesn't just mean a bruised ego, it means death. You've seen it happen before, when a revolt is crushed. The peasants who led it are publicly executed, displayed in the town square as examples to others who might dare to rise up. The nobles, the clergy, and the ruling class have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. They know that the fear of punishment is one of the most effective tools they have to keep the peasantry in line. It's a chilling thought, but it's the reality you live with every day. Still, there's a quiet rebellion that brews in your heart, a rebellion that may never see the light of day, but that exists nonetheless. It's the rebellion of survival, the quiet refusal to be broken by the system. Every day you rise and face the same struggles, the same exhaustion, but you do it. You endure. Maybe that's the most subversive thing of all, to continue to survive in a system that's designed to break you. Despite the crushing weight of the class system, there's always a faint flicker of change in the air, however small, however distant. The medieval world is changing, albeit slowly, and though the hierarchy remains rigid, cracks are starting to form. You may not feel it directly, as a peasant toiling in the fields, but the winds of change are stirring in places like towns, guilds, and even courts. For the first time in centuries, a new class of people is beginning to emerge. Merchants, craftsmen, and traders, people who deal in goods, services, and money, are slowly gaining more influence and wealth. These people, the middle class, are beginning to redefine what it means to hold power. The shift is subtle, but it's there, and it gives you a glimmer of hope. However faint, perhaps there's a way out after all. The rise of towns is central to this shift. In the towns, the feudal system doesn't hold quite as tightly. Merchants, artisans, and even some skilled laborers are able to make a name for themselves, and their growing wealth provides them with a certain level of autonomy. In many ways, these towns offer an escape from the rigid structure of rural life. If you're lucky enough to be born into a merchant family or to become an apprentice in a guild, you might find yourself with opportunities that the traditional class system can't entirely control. Here, wealth can bring freedom. But even in these towns, you're still bound by the social structure. Nobles still have their land and titles. The church still commands immense power, and the peasants still serve. The middle class may be rising, but it's rising with the same constraints. Historians still argue about the extent to which towns and the merchant class were responsible for the eventual decline of feudalism. Some argue that they were the catalyst for social mobility, allowing for the creation of a new, more flexible social order. Others believe that these towns and the middle class only solidified the divide between the elites and the rest, creating a new kind of hierarchy based on wealth rather than birth. Either way, it's clear that the medieval world was not static, and the rise of towns and the middle class marked a significant shift in the social and economic fabric of society. Still, the question remains: could these changes ever lead to real equality, or would they just create new forms of division and hierarchy? For you, the notion of a rising middle class feels distant. Perhaps, just perhaps, there's a chance for someone like you to break free from the cycle of labor. You've heard that some peasants can make a small fortune by crafting goods, trading in the markets, or even starting small businesses. But those stories are rare, and they usually come with a price. The work is harder, the competition fierce, and the risks higher. There's also the constant threat of being pulled back into the system, back into the fields, back under the control of the Lord. Still, you can't help but wonder if, in some small way, these towns represent the hope for something different. Maybe not for you, not in this life, but for your children, for the future. Maybe, just maybe, they'll see a world that's not so heavily defined by class. But for now, all you can do is keep working, keep surviving. You're not the one making the changes, but perhaps you'll witness them. Maybe, one day, you'll be a part of them, if only from the periphery. For now, the daily grind remains. You wake, you work, you survive. As you settle into the rhythm of life, it becomes clear that the medieval class structure is not just a social system. It's a deeply ingrained way of life. It affects everything from your family's role to the very land you work. You're a cog in a machine that turns slowly, methodically, and with little room for deviation. But there are moments when the weight of this system bears down on you too heavily. And you can't help but wonder if this is all there is to life. The lords, the knights, the clergy, they all have their place, their power, their wealth. And you're left with your hands in the dirt, working the fields or the mill, doing the same things your ancestors did before you. It's as if your destiny has been written long before you were born. The fear of being stuck in this cycle, of having no escape, is a constant companion. Every time you look up at the towering castle in the distance, every time you hear the clink of coins exchanged between merchants, you're reminded of the vast gap between you and them. The nobility, the clergy, and even the growing merchant class all have something you don't. Choice. They have the ability to move, to decide their futures, to change their fates. You, on the other hand, are bound by the land, by the will of your Lord, and by the invisible chains of the social order. The choices you make are minimal, your actions dictated by necessity. The world may be changing, but for you, it feels like there is no way out. Historians still argue about how entrenched this class structure was. Some suggest that feudalism was the natural state of medieval society, based on the agricultural economy and the need for protection and control. Others believe that it was a system maintained by force and tradition, one that kept people in their place, stifling innovation and growth. What's clear is that the social hierarchy shaped every aspect of life, and for most people, It was something they couldn't escape. While some peasants were able to rise through the ranks by working hard, making money, or through the luck of their birth, the vast majority remained where they started, at the bottom. The idea of moving up the social ladder seemed as improbable as a knight becoming a peasant. But as you work, you can't help but see glimpses of change. The world is evolving, albeit at a slow pace. There's talk of kings imposing new laws, of new systems of justice being created to deal with disputes. You've heard that some nobles are being forced to share more of their land, giving peasants a bit more freedom. It's hard to know how much of this is true, though change in the medieval world doesn't happen quickly, and it doesn't happen without resistance. Still, there's something about the idea of these changes that stirs a faint hope inside you. It's not much, but it's something to hold on to. Yet, even as the world shifts ever so slightly, the basic structure of life remains the same for you. You wake, you work, you pray, and you hope. The day may come when things are different, when the lords no longer hold all the power, when the peasants have a greater say in their own lives. But for now, it's just another day, just another season to survive. Maybe, in another generation or two, things will be different, or maybe not. The future is always uncertain, especially when the present feels so rigid, so unyielding. As you continue through the endless routine, you realize that the world around you is not static, despite how it may seem. There are whispers in the corners of the village, whispers that speak of distant lands, of kings and lords who wield power in ways that go beyond just the land they own. You hear talk of the Renaissance, the dawning of a new age that's starting to change how people view themselves and their roles in society. Ideas of the individual, of the importance of knowledge, of art and discovery, are slowly beginning to spread. But these ideas are far removed from your world. They feel like myths, stories you can only dream of, but will never touch. Still, you find yourself intrigued by these changes, by the notion that there is something more to life than simply serving at the will of others. You begin to wonder what it would be like to live in a world where you had the ability to shape your own destiny, to rise above the unrelenting cycle of labor that defines your existence. But for now, those thoughts remain distant. Something to ponder during the rare moments of rest after a long day in the fields. The truth is, though, you know that change, true change, is not something that happens overnight. It is a slow, gradual process that requires more than just a shift in ideas. It requires a complete restructuring of society, something so fundamental that it would shake the very foundations of the medieval world. And for someone like you, a peasant, that's a change that will take generations, if not longer. You've heard that in some distant towns. The merchant class is becoming more powerful, and even some peasants are able to buy their way out of servitude. But such stories seem like fairy tales to you, hopelessly out of reach. Historians still debate how deeply the medieval class system influenced the lives of ordinary people. Some argue that peasants had more agency than we typically assume, pointing to examples of self-determined communities and minor acts of resistance that helped shape society. Others argue that feudalism was an iron cage, where peasants had little to no chance of rising above their station. What's clear, however, is that for most people, the class system was a deeply embedded reality that shaped everything, from who you married, to what you ate, to whether or not you even survived the next season. For you, it remains the same. You work, you survive, and you dream, quietly, in the corners of your mind, of a world where the lines between the classes blur, where your family might finally live without fear of famine or punishment. You wonder if your children will have a chance at something more, something beyond the limits of their birth. But even as you hope for change, you know deep down that this hope may be nothing more than a dream that may never come true. As the day fades into night, you can feel the weight of the system around you, pressing in on all sides. There's no escaping it, no outrunning it. Your place in this world is defined, as it has always been, by forces far beyond your control. The Lord will come to collect the rent, the priest will bless your crops, and the cycle will continue. You'll work tomorrow as you worked today, as you worked yesterday. But somewhere in the back of your mind, that flicker of hope still burns, small, fragile, but alive. Maybe one day, you'll see the change you've been waiting for. Maybe not. Either way, you'll keep going, keep surviving, keep living. As the seasons continue to pass, you begin to notice the subtle yet undeniable changes in the air. The medieval world, for all its rigidity and oppression, is beginning to evolve, though it may be imperceptible to the majority of peasants. It's there, in the undercurrents of everyday life. For some, the winds of change blow strong enough to offer a glimpse of hope. For others, like yourself, it's a quiet, almost imperceptible shift that whispers promises of something better. The town square now has more merchants than ever, more goods flowing through the market. The small town where you live is growing. And while the nobility still controls the land, there's a sense that something is different. It's as if the walls that separate the classes are becoming thinner. And though they're not coming down yet, it feels like they could be someday. But even the smallest sign of hope feels distant, even impossible, for those who have known nothing but servitude. As you walk through the village, the hum of conversation has a different edge to it. It's a murmuring of something more than just the usual gossip. People speak in hushed voices about the king's latest decree, a change in laws, or a noble who has begun to treat their tenants a little more fairly than usual. Maybe, just maybe, there's a chance that life can improve. If not for you, then for the next generation. It's a subtle change, something that could easily be overlooked. But you feel it. It's the kind of shift that happens slowly, almost imperceptibly. You don't expect to be the one to bring it about. But there's a quiet sense of pride in knowing that you've lived to see even the smallest possibility of change. Historians still debate how much these slow, incremental shifts in medieval society mattered. Some argue that the rise of towns and guilds played a significant role in challenging the old feudal structures, laying the groundwork for a new social order that would eventually replace the old ways. Others suggest that these changes were fleeting, small ripples in an otherwise stagnant system that would continue to dominate for centuries. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. The medieval world wasn't one to transform quickly, but it was a world that eventually evolved. Sometimes through revolution, sometimes through quiet transformation. For now, though, you remain a peasant, a part of the old world. You wake up before the sun rises, go to the fields, and work until the last sliver of daylight fades. The change you long for is still far out of reach, but the faintest whisper of it lingers in the back of your mind. Perhaps One day, your children will live in a world that looks nothing like this, a world where they can choose their future, where they won't be bound to the land. Perhaps one day, the system will crumble, and with it, the rigid lines of class that have defined every moment of your life. But for now, you work, you survive, and you carry the hope that things will one day be better. In the quiet of the night, as you lie on your straw mattress and listen to the sounds of the village, you can't help but feel that, despite everything, you've made it. You've survived another day. And that, in this world, is something worth holding on to. Each week, the market square is the heart of the village, no matter the weather. It always draws a crowd. On market days, you rise early, as usual, your body aching from the last few days of labor. The promise of a brief moment away from the fields, where you can interact with the people of the town, makes you feel like there's some semblance of life beyond the unrelenting work. There's something about the market that's both exhilarating and overwhelming, every face familiar, but still distant. Here, you catch fleeting glimpses of different classes, peasants, merchants, lords, and occasionally even a passing knight. At the market, it's easier to feel the weight of class than anywhere else. The merchants and their wares are on display: jewelry, cloth, spices, and grains. But while their goods are valuable and often traded across far distances, their position is precarious. Merchants are wealthier than peasants, yet they are still outside the castle walls, looking up at the lords above them. No matter how much money they make, they will never command the same respect as a knight, nor have the same security as the landed gentry. Still, you observe their wealth, their finely woven garments, and their foreign goods, and you wonder if this could be the life you dreamt of, the one of relative independence. Yet, no matter how much a merchant's life might seem appealing, you know that for you, the price of this life would come with uncertainty. There's something about the stability of working the land that calls to you. Yes, you are beholden to your lord, but your work is constant, your needs simple, and your survival is ensured, if not by wealth, at least by predictability. The merchants, on the other hand, are constantly at the mercy of the market, the prices, the weather, and the whims of the nobility. It's a constant game of risk, where one bad season, one shift in demand, could see them lose everything. And still, despite all of this, you can't help but be drawn to the energy of the market, the exchange of goods, the spirited bargaining, the hustle of the crowd. All of it represents something you'll never have access to. The complexity of the relationships between merchant, knight, and peasant plays out in the short exchanges, in the trade of goods, in the glances that linger just a moment too long. It is a rare space where the social lines blur, even if for just a moment, where the merchants, though wealthy, are no longer the ultimate authority. Historians still debate the role of market towns in the evolution of medieval society. Some view them as the key to a slow but eventual decline in feudalism, where towns provided a space for peasants to escape the constraints of rural life and engage in commerce and trade. Others suggest that these markets, though significant, were still deeply embedded in feudal systems that kept the class structure firmly in place. What's clear is that these market days were a spectacle, one that left you feeling both inspired and deeply reminded of your place. The rich might enjoy their wealth and comfort, but even they could never escape the system that had shaped their lives, just as you could never escape the system that had shaped yours. The market, like all things, was both a place of opportunity and limitation. You gather the goods your family needs, trying to avoid eye contact with the merchants whose superior status lingers in the air like the smell of fresh bread. You'll never be one of them, and they'll never see you as anything more than another peasant trying to scrape by. And yet, the market remains a place where those fleeting moments of connection with a stranger, with another person's life, offer the illusion of a different world, one where your place in the social order isn't defined by birth. But in the end, you know better. The market will change you only so much. The end of another long day finds you retreating to your home, a small, humble hovel that offers little protection against the creeping cold of the night. The work in the fields is never truly done. But for now, there's respite in the dark. You've heard the stories of strange happenings in the village, whispers of discontent, of rebels stirring beneath the surface, and of potential betrayals among the lords. You know better than to pay them much attention. Yet a cold feeling creeps into your gut. The noble families, despite their wealth and power, are beginning to feel threatened, and the fear of rebellion is spreading like a disease across the land. In the late hours of the evening, the village square remains a somber reminder of the divide between the classes. The market, now closed, is quiet, but there is still movement in the shadows. The Lord's guards, clad in iron armor, walk the streets, their sharp eyes scanning for anything out of place. The watch is a grim and necessary part of life now, with the threat of revolt hanging heavy over the village. Even the nobles have begun to increase their vigilance. The paranoia is palpable. As you pass the guards, your shoulders tense. There's no escaping their watchful gaze. The knights are ever present, their swords at their sides, as they stand sentinel over the wealth and land that belong to their lords. They walk in pairs, as if expecting someone to make a move, ready to crush any hint of rebellion before it gains ground. You notice the fear on the faces of your fellow peasants as they go about their evening tasks. They will, too, are aware of the tension, of the subtle threat that looms over the village. It's not just the fear of punishment from the lords anymore. It's the fear of being labeled as a traitor, a rebel, someone who would dare challenge the natural order. Historians still debate whether the growing militarization of medieval society was a sign of the system's decline, or a tool used by the ruling class to maintain control. Some suggest that the constant watch over the peasantry and the rise of powerful militias were necessary to ensure that order was maintained in a world that could erupt into chaos at any moment. Others argue that the rise of paranoia and fear only served to further entrench the social hierarchy, reinforcing the separation between the lords and the laborers. Either way, the constant surveillance of peasants by the ruling class speaks to the immense control that the nobility wielded in every corner of life. As you walk past the guard posts, you can't help but feel the weight of their eyes on your back. The streetlights flicker above you, casting eerie shadows that make your heart race just a little faster. You've heard stories of peasants being wrongfully accused of rebellion, of being dragged into the square and publicly punished as an example to others. The memory of the last public execution still lingers in the back of your mind, the body hanging from the gallows, a grim reminder of the consequences of defiance. The fear of being caught in a rebellion, of being labeled as a traitor, is overwhelming. It's not just about the risk of death. It's about the loss of everything you know. It's the loss of your family, your home, and your very identity. Even the slightest suspicion of wrongdoing could be enough to destroy everything you've worked for. And in a world where survival is already a daily struggle, The fear of losing it all is enough to keep you in line, to keep you working the fields day after day, hoping for a break, but never daring to dream of something more. As the night draws on, you finally make your way home, your body heavy from the long day of labor. You sit by the fire, the warmth creeping into your bones, and for a moment, the fear begins to fade. But it's never far from your mind. You know that tomorrow, the watch will return, the guards will be there, and the weight of the system will once again bear down on you. You can't escape it, and you wonder, as you lie down to sleep, if anyone ever truly can. The church, as ever, stands at the center of the village. Its tall stone walls and towering spire are visible from almost every corner, reminding you, and everyone else, of the immense power the church holds over the lives of peasants like yourself. The doors of the church open every day for prayer, but it's not just a place of worship. It's a place where the soul is promised salvation, but where the church also exerts its influence over life and death. The priest is not just a spiritual leader. He is a figure of authority, sometimes more powerful than the local lord. His sermons echo through the village every Sunday, a reminder that you are small, that your life is part of a larger divine plan. Whether you find solace or frustration in the church's promises depends on your view of your own fate. On a normal day, the church is quiet, save for the few peasants who come for confession or to light a candle for a family member. But on Sundays, when Mass is held, it's a different atmosphere entirely. The church becomes the heart of the village, the focal point of both faith and social order. You kneel before the altar, the flicker of the candles casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. The priest speaks of humility, of obedience, of submission to God's will. These lessons are not just moral, they're social. The church's teachings remind you, each time you listen, of your place in the world. The idea of heaven, of divine reward, hangs just out of reach, but it is promised for those who endure their suffering on earth. For peasants, this is a comforting thought. It's the only real hope for a better life. But the truth is much darker than the promises of salvation the church preaches. Behind the walls of this grand institution, there is also an immense concentration of wealth. The church owns large swaths of land, just like the nobles, and its influence extends far beyond the pews of the village. The gold chalices, the ornate vestments, and the rich offerings collected from each Sunday service all add to the enormous wealth of the clergy. The priest might tell you to live humbly, but his lavish lifestyle, and that of his superiors, is anything but humble. It's a stark contrast, one that you can't help but notice as you stand in the church, eyes fixed on the figure of Christ. The image of the priest's luxurious life lingers in the back of your mind. Historians still argue over the role of the church in shaping medieval class structures. Some suggest that the church's influence was a stabilizing force, encouraging peasants to accept their lot in life, but also offering them solace and guidance. Others argue that the church was a tool of the ruling class, working in tandem with the nobility to keep the peasantry in check, reinforcing the idea that suffering on earth would be rewarded in heaven. Either way, it's clear that the church played a central role in maintaining the status quo, allowing the classes to remain in place while offering hope of a better life beyond death. For you, the promise of heaven is all that sustains you in your daily toil. There are moments when you think about what life could be like without this constant reminder of your position in life. What if the church didn't hold such power over the villagers? What if you weren't taught to simply accept your fate with humility, but were instead encouraged to rise above your station, yet, in those moments of defiance, you can feel the crushing weight of centuries of tradition, the church, the lords, and even the village elders have been telling people like you to accept your life for so long that it feels impossible to imagine anything different. Perhaps that is the church's greatest power, not just its wealth, but its ability to convince you that your lot in life is divinely ordained, that you are where you belong. As the Mass comes to an end, you rise with the rest of the congregation, filing out into the cold air, feeling both lighter and more burdened. The prayers, the promises, they're all part of the system that holds you in place. The church offers you hope, but it also reminds you that you're part of a grand, unchangeable plan. There's peace in that, and also a heavy sadness. The thought that your life has already been decided, that you will always be a peasant, working the land, looking up at the lords and knights who control it all. There's comfort in knowing what's expected of you, but also a deep longing for more. For a moment, as you step into the sunlight and feel the chill of the wind against your skin, you wonder if things might ever change for you or for anyone in this village. The sun sets slowly over the land, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple as the day fades into the cold grip of night. The air grows chilly, and the village starts to quiet down. You take a breath, feeling the coolness in your lungs, and watch as the last rays of light illuminate the distant walls of the Lord's manor. From your vantage point in the fields, you can see the contrast between your world and theirs. The manor, with its stone walls and grand windows, sits high on a hill, removed from the dirt and muck that define your existence. It's a place of privilege, wealth, and power, everything that you and your fellow peasants will never know. But even from this distance, you can sense that the life within those walls isn't as perfect as it seems. The nobility, the lords and ladies who rule over the land, are often portrayed as detached, living lives of leisure, constantly feasting and attending to their estates. But you know that their lives are not without their own burdens. Their power, though seemingly absolute, comes with its own weight. Their titles, their land, their wealth. They may look enviable from a distance. But the reality is that the nobility must constantly fight to maintain it. Every landowner is at the mercy of political shifts, feuds with other noble houses, and the threat of rebellion from the peasants they control. The stability of their position is fragile, and they must rely on knights and armies to protect it. In fact, the nobility is often just as trapped in the system as you are. The lords are expected to manage their lands, enforce the laws, and provide protection to their subjects, all while adhering to the same rigid expectations of their social rank. Their freedom, too, is limited. The burden of ruling can be overwhelming, and the constant pressure to maintain control over their domains can be just as exhausting as the labor in the fields. The nobility may not have to toil in the mud, but their lives are defined by a constant need to assert their authority, to keep their power intact. A failed crop, a betrayal from within their own ranks, or the rise of a rival lord can bring everything crashing down. Historians still argue about the complexities of medieval aristocracy. Some suggest that the feudal system, for all its harshness, was mutually beneficial for both the nobles and the peasants. Nobles provided protection and stability, while peasants offered labor in exchange for security. Others believed that the nobles were deeply disconnected from the lives of their peasants, living in a bubble of privilege that ignored the struggles of those beneath them. Whatever the case, it's clear that the nobility's role in society was not without its own challenges. And despite the wealth they accumulate, they too are caught in a web of obligations, constantly guarding their status and position. For you, the idea of being part of this cycle of control, even from the perspective of the nobility, feels just as oppressive as being a peasant. Their role in society may be elevated, but it is not without its own set of struggles. Perhaps this is what makes the class system so particularly brutal. No matter where you are on the ladder, you are bound by it. Whether you're a peasant struggling to survive, or a noble struggling to maintain control, the system dictates your every move. The Lord may have land and wealth, but they too must answer to higher powers, whether it be the king or the church, or the ever-present specter of rebellion. And yet, in the stillness of the evening, as you look up at the manor from your small cottage, you realize that despite all the struggles, the world will continue on. The peasants will continue to work. The nobles will continue to rule. And the system, for better or worse, will remain in place. It is this unchanging structure that has defined every life in this land for centuries. And it seems almost impossible to imagine a time when things might be different. The Lord's manor, glowing faintly in the night, serves as a reminder of this unyielding system. You know that in a world where nothing changes, survival is the only true victory. Perhaps the next generation will see a different world. But for now, you can only carry on. You work, you live, and you endure. The nobility may seem distant, but they are bound to the same system as you are, one that never truly lets go. As the seasons cycle endlessly, you come to understand one undeniable truth: the world around you, for all its fleeting moments of change, is firmly anchored in the past. You've watched your parents and their parents before them repeat the same laborious tasks, year after year, each generation living the same life, bound by the same unspoken rules. It's the way things are. It's how the world works. You've heard the stories told by the elders of how things were once different, perhaps even better. But those tales seem as distant as the lands beyond the mountains, places you'll never see. The burden of tradition is heavy, and it's one you feel every day. It's the tradition of working the land, of serving the Lord, of knowing your place and never questioning it. It's embedded in every part of your existence, from the way you wake up with the dawn, to the way you spend your days in the fields, to the way you bow your head in church on Sundays. There is no room for rebellion, no room for change. Your ancestors lived this way, and so will your children and their children after them. The idea that anyone could break free from this cycle feels as impossible as stopping the sun from setting. It's the rhythm of life, and it's unchanging. But then, in the quiet moments, when the work slows down and you can sit beside your fire, you allow yourself to think. You've heard whispers, sometimes from traveling merchants, sometimes from townspeople, about other places, other worlds where things are different. Some talk of kings and queens who rule differently, of lords who treat their peasants as equals, of societies where the rigid boundaries of birth and station aren't so firmly entrenched. You listen, though you know such stories are likely fantasies, imagined by those who are looking for something more. But still, the thought lingers. Could there ever be a life that is different from the one you were born into? Could you, or anyone in your village, ever break free from this cycle of hard labor, this unchanging reality? Historians still debate the extent to which traditions shaped medieval society. Some argue that the adherence to old customs was necessary for maintaining stability, especially in a time of frequent wars and political upheaval. The feudal system, with its unyielding structure, provided a sense of order in an otherwise chaotic world. Others suggest that the weight of tradition suffocated the possibilities of change, trapping people in a system that prioritized obedience over innovation, survival over opportunity. Either way, what's clear is that the deep roots of tradition in medieval life were both a comfort and a curse. For some, it provided stability. For others, it stifled progress and kept them locked in a world that had no room for advancement. You, as a peasant, feel this burden more than most. Your life is a reflection of your ancestors' lives, their struggles, their hardships. You are born into the system, and there is little room for deviation from it. The traditions of your people, their way of living, their relationship with the land, and their subservience to the nobility are passed down through generations, etched into your very being. There are moments when you wonder what would happen if you broke free from these traditions, if you could somehow change the course of your life. But the reality is always there, the weight of your duties, the constant reminder that you have no real power to change the world around you. The Lord will always have control. The church will always offer salvation in exchange for obedience. And the feudal system will continue to churn on, regardless of your wishes. And yet, in those quiet moments before sleep, as you lie on your straw mattress, you can't help but dream. You dream of a world where class distinctions are less rigid, where people are not bound by birth, but by skill and merit. You dream of a world where your children will have a choice in their lives, where they won't be slaves to tradition. You know it's a dream, but it's a dream you hold close, because it offers a small shred of hope in a world that often feels hopeless. Perhaps one day, the world will change. Perhaps the generations that follow will have the strength to break free from the past. But for now, you carry the weight of tradition with you. It's the legacy you inherit, the legacy that keeps you grounded in the present, reminding you of who you are and where you come from. And as much as you may wish for a different life, you know that your place in the world, though painful, is a part of the grand tapestry that stretches across time. In the distance, across the fields, the faint murmur of the town grows louder as you approach it. The village square, normally a bustling hub of activity, feels different today. There's a heaviness in the air, a tension that you can feel crawling beneath your skin. You've heard the rumors, the whispers of discontent that have begun to spread like wildfire through the village. The peasants, led by a few brave souls who've dared to speak up, are talking about revolt. They speak of fighting back against the oppression, of refusing to work the land for the lords any longer. The thought of it stirs something deep inside you, a flicker of hope, maybe even fear. Can it be true? Could this cycle of servitude finally be broken? It's a dangerous idea, one that's been tried before, but failed. You've heard the stories of the uprisings that never succeeded, the peasants' revolt, the uprisings in other lands where the peasants were crushed, their leaders executed in public to serve as examples. The fear of punishment is always a powerful deterrent. But today, there's something different in the air. You hear talk of more coordination, more organization. The peasants are growing restless, no longer willing to sit idly by and bear the weight of their oppressors' demands. Could this time be different? Could the lords and knights finally be defeated? Their hold over the land broken? You know better than to get your hopes up. The nobility has always held power, and the chance of a successful rebellion seems distant at best. The soldiers, the guards, the knights, they are trained for battle. They are the enforcers of the laws, and they are quick to put down any signs of rebellion with extreme force. The peasants, on the other hand, are unarmed, undertrained, and fragmented. You're not soldiers, you're workers. The risks are too high. Failure is not just an abstract idea, it's a reality. If you rise, if you stand against the Lord, you could lose everything. Your family, your home, your life. But even as you remind yourself of this, there's a part of you that wonders, maybe it's just the exhaustion talking, the years of hard labor under the same oppressive system. But for the first time in a long while, you feel a spark of defiance. The thought of the rebellion, of the peasants rising up and taking back what has been taken from them for so long, is intoxicating. It's a dream you've had, but one you've never dared to speak aloud. Could this dream become a reality? Could you, and those around you, find the courage to challenge the system that has crushed your spirit for so long? Historians still argue about the effectiveness of peasant revolts. Some suggest that these uprisings were nothing more than short bursts of desperation, doomed to fail because of the deeply entrenched power structures that had been in place for centuries. Others argue that these revolts, though small and often crushed, were crucial in sowing the seeds of social change. They were signs of the growing discontent among the lower classes, a challenge to the entrenched systems of power that ultimately led to the decline of feudalism. But you don't know what to believe. You only know that, for you, the idea of standing up to the Lord feels like a long-lost dream, a dream that may never come true, but one that still stirs something deep within you. But there's another truth that nags at the back of your mind. The weight of tradition is a powerful force. It's what keeps the system intact. It's what has kept people like you bound to the land for centuries. The notion of revolt, of breaking away from the oppressive system, is terrifying not just because of the consequences, but because of the deep-seated fear of failure, of losing everything you know. This system, harsh as it is, has been your reality for as long as you can remember. The idea of tearing it down, of going against centuries of tradition, feels almost impossible. What would life be like after a revolt? Would it truly bring freedom? Or would it simply be replaced with something equally oppressive? For now, you stay in the shadows of the village square, watching the murmurs grow louder. You're caught between the past and the future, between the fear of the known and the hope for something better. The whispers of revolt are still just that, whispers. But even whispers, when carried on the wind, can become a storm. And though you're unsure whether you're ready to face the storm, you know that something has shifted within you. A small seed of rebellion has been planted, one that may grow, one day, into something much larger. As the cold winds of the coming winter sweep through the village, you can't help but feel a sense of uncertainty hanging in the air. The whispers of revolt have begun to fade, but they haven't been forgotten. The village has returned to its normal rhythm, with peasants back in the fields, laboring for the same Lord, in the same unbroken cycle. Yet there's something in the air, something that lingers long after the day's work is done. And it's not just the promise of winter. It's the undeniable truth that you, and those around you, are part of a world that is slowly changing, even if you can't yet see the shape of that change. The nobility remains at the top. The clergy still wields immense influence, and the peasants continue to toil away, their lives governed by the whims of the powerful. It seems like nothing has changed, and yet everything has changed. The spark of defiance that once stirred your heart is still there, though now it feels distant, like a dream half remembered. It's still hard to imagine a world where the peasants no longer serve the Lord, where the divisions between classes are erased. But that small seed of hope, that glimmer of rebellion, refuses to fade entirely. You look around at your fellow villagers, those who once whispered of revolt and now return to their daily routines with quiet resolve. They've seen their share of suffering, their hopes dashed. But there's something in their eyes that tells you they haven't given up completely. Even if they can't see the change yet, even if they don't fully believe that anything will ever shift, they continue to live, to work, to survive. There's a quiet dignity in that. It's the dignity of survival, the knowledge that no matter how hard life gets, you still keep moving forward. The future remains uncertain, and the fear of failure still lingers over every decision. But the simple act of living, of enduring, is an act of resistance in itself. The idea of freedom, of breaking free from the chains of feudalism, may seem distant, almost impossible. But the truth is, you no longer see it as entirely out of reach. It's not about overthrowing the Lord's tomorrow or tearing down the church today. It's about small steps, quiet shifts, and the gradual erosion of the structures that have defined society for centuries. The world is not static. And though you may not see the fruits of this change in your lifetime, you know that you are part of a long, slow march towards something better. Even in the darkest hours, even in the coldest winters, there is a flicker of hope. Maybe your children will live to see it, or your grandchildren. But that's the reality of survival in a world built on hierarchy. Change doesn't come quickly, but it does come. As you sit by the fire, the flickering flames casting long shadows across your humble home, you allow yourself to rest. The weight of the day, of the years, of the centuries of tradition is always there. But for tonight, you let it go. There's nothing you can do but survive. To live one more day, one more season. The world may be unyielding, but your spirit remains unbroken. You'll rise tomorrow, just as you have every other day. And as long as you have that, there's still a future worth living for. The sound of the wind outside picks up, howling through the cracks in the walls. It's a reminder of the cold that waits just outside, of the world that never stops turning, and of the cycle that continues unbroken. But tonight, as you close your eyes and let the warmth of the fire seep into your bones, you allow yourself a moment of peace, a fleeting hope, a quiet dream that one day the future will be different, and the chains of the past will be shattered.